Hello, welcome back. I'm Peggy Oliveira, your host for this series for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Today I want to talk about how faith, religion, plays into myths and stereotypes and ultimately shame for survivors. This is one of the things that came up really from quite a few people who responded to my request for what things they want people to know about what it means to be a survivor. This is a big topic. There are a lot of pieces that I could get into that will really take a lot more time and depth than what this episode can really cover. But I thought it was important because it's not something that is talked about too often. So there were some themes that came through, and for the most part, it was people that grew up with ideas around faith and religion. Their families were religious, for many growing up in an environment that church or religion was a significant part of their upbringing, a significant part of their values and understanding of the world, and ultimately the impact that it had on how they viewed themselves, how they viewed the world, and again, the shame they were left with. So I want to be clear, this isn't about religion as a form of something to believe in. This is about how religion can impact a person's sense of self. So thank you for listening. I'd love to hear from you about your own experiences, your thoughts, your reactions. This might be a difficult episode to listen to. It may bring up some things. You might find yourself feeling some resistance to the ideas, especially if you yourself have grown up in an environment that was strongly religious, very strict views about things, about people. So one of the things that I've talked about before on YouTube is the idea of forgiveness. I'm not going to go into what it means so much as the impact that we need to forgive and what it means to forgive, the impact that that can have on a survivor of abuse. So one of the ideas is that forgiveness is necessary, that good people forgive, that if you don't forgive, you can't be a good person. If you don't forgive, then you will continue to carry the burden that you can never be at peace, that in some ways, ultimately, you can never be deserving. So if you've watched my video on forgiveness, you know that I don't believe this at all. But in terms of the impact that it has, you do have to kind of look at what does it mean in your mind to forgive. But the idea from religion, and I'm no expert in religion, but what I've heard from people who have grown up in religious environments, who have believed in what they've been taught, the impact of you need to forgive ends up being incredibly shaming. It really has an impact on a person's sense of self because the reality is that forgiveness is incredibly complex. While we can make it simple in our thinking, the reality of how it feels in our body, of what it means about who we are and how we view our experiences, is quite different and it's quite complex. So people will say, well, you just need to forgive and then you'll feel better. You just need to forgive because everybody sins, everybody makes mistakes. This can feel incredibly dismissive to a survivor, really for a number of reasons. But what it can leave a survivor with ultimately is there's something wrong with me that I can't fully forgive. Or there's something really wrong with me because I have forgiven, and yet I still struggle in some way. For some people, if I forgive, then that means that I feel perfectly okay being around that person and I go on. I don't hold any feelings or negative feelings about that person, and I can, or I should be able to be with that person, be around them and continue or maintain the relationship. And again, that's incredibly dismissive. There's so much that isn't taken into account with that, including mental health. So, what do we want people to know? I think part of it in this regard is that everybody's healing journey is different. Everybody's path to get to a place of feeling whole and free may look different. And even if somebody forgives or wants to forgive, that may look and feel different than another person's idea. But in any way, telling a survivor that they need to do something to be a good person or to heal is actually quite harming. Another way that survivors are greatly impacted is the idea of turning it over to God, praying that if you just do those things, then all will be forgiven in the eyes of God, that you will feel better, that you'll be able to forgive, that things happen for a reason, and if you just give it up to God to find the reason, then you will be better, stronger, ultimately more worthy for having lived through it. Well, I've known too many people to count over the years who have desperately prayed. They've prayed for the abuse to end. They've prayed to feel better. They've prayed to be forgiven for what they believe they did to cause it. And for so many people, that prayer leads to feeling unworthy because their prayers are not answered. Being told to pray when you're struggling, and maybe you do pray and those prayers are not answered, think about the message that sends, that you're not doing it well enough, that maybe you're not deserving of having those prayers answered. Because if prayer is supposed to work, whatever work might look like, but yet it's not working for you, most people are going to come to the same conclusion. Another way that this can be incredibly harming is that even people who aren't particularly religious as children, they often find themselves praying in some form for it to stop. The abuse, the pain, the uncertainty. And of course, it rarely does. So as children, it is proof, quote unquote, that it's happening because of them. Maybe even that they're being punished. I've heard people say that their prayers were not answered because they were bad, that they inherently were bad, and therefore it was a punishment from God. That breaks my heart. And of course, there's so much shame ingrained in that. And then later you're told to pray once again to feel better, to move on. And you do. But of course, you still struggle. I've known a lot of people who have said that they forgave because it was the Christian thing to do, because it was the right thing to do, and feel so much shame because they know internally that they still struggle with feelings towards their abuser. That a person who forgave in the right way shouldn't or wouldn't feel. And that shame is so deep. Another thing that came up in some of the responses that I got back was making sense out of the mixed messages. On one hand, your faith tells you to be good, to do unto your neighbor, to forgive, to help those that are less fortunate, to not judge, and at the same time, witnessing those things happening, especially in the last handful of years or so. I think mostly in the US, but in other parts of the world too, as things shift, our political experiences and the mixed messages, the disappointment in what people have believed about some of the people around them. And that disappointment coming from believing something about people that you care about, and then witnessing something quite different, and then trying to make it make sense that what you've held on to and the shame that you've ended up feeling from these people, you then witness something very different, and the confusion that that created for them, and how that can begin to kind of unravel everything that you've believed, and the disconnection, the fear that that can create. So what I took from some of the messages that I received back is that when it comes to faith, when it comes to religion, that we all interpret it in a way that fits with what we believe. And to use religion when somebody has been abused or assaulted, when they're trying to find their path, that what they really want and what they really need is to feel supported in where they are now, not mandates about how to be better, what they should and shouldn't do when it comes to faith or God, whatever that God may be. You could even look at this in terms of spirituality as it relates to positive thinking or manifesting, like thinking positive. People want and need to be met where they are. What worked for you may not work for somebody else. And we all just want to be witnessed as we are. We want to know that we matter and can be supported no matter what we believe, no matter what our path may look like. We want to be accepted and loved and valued for who we are, even if it doesn't fit with your idea of what is right, whole, or holy.